He moves through history like a shadow no one can touch. A man whose name appears in intelligence files from Tehran, Berlin, Buenos Aires, all the way to the desks of Western counter-terror agencies. For decades, Ali Fallahian has been described as the spymaster who turned Iran's intelligence machinery into one of the most feared covert networks on Earth. To some, he is a loyal servant of the Islamic Republic. To others, he is the architect of international assassinations, political silencing, and operations so secretive that even those inside the system whispered his name with caution. But who is the man behind these allegations? How did a cleric from Najafabad rise to become the alleged mastermind behind missions that shook governments and changed diplomatic relations? And why do Interpol, Germany, and Argentina still consider him a critical figure in unresolved attacks from the 1990s? This is not a story about cartels, gangsters, or street-level violence. This is a story about a man operating at the highest levels of state intelligence, where power is invisible, motives are buried, and the truth is often sealed away by politics. As the world continues to debate his role in some of the most controversial operations of the last half-century, one question remains. Is Ali Fallahian a guardian of his nation, or the hidden force behind a global web of fear? Long before his name appeared in intelligence reports across Europe and South America, Ali Fallahian was simply a young cleric shaped by the strict religious currents of post-revolution Iran. Born in Najafabad, a conservative stronghold known for producing influential clerics, he grew up in an environment where discipline, ideology, and loyalty to the Islamic Republic were not just values, but expectations. Those early years, spent under teachers who embraced the revolutionary spirit, forged in him a worldview where national survival trumped individual rights, and where secrecy was not a tactic, but a virtue. When the 1979 Iranian Revolution toppled the monarchy, Fallahian was among the young ideologues who saw an opportunity to serve a nation being rebuilt from the ashes. His religious training gave him proximity to powerful clerics, and his reputation for absolute obedience and discretion quickly placed him inside circles where politics and intelligence began to merge. He entered the newly formed security structure at a moment when the country faced internal uprisings, foreign threats, and ideological fractures. To many inside the regime, someone like Fallahian, quiet, loyal, and unflinching, was exactly what they needed. As he moved through the early ranks of Iran's security apparatus, he became known not for flamboyance but for something far more valuable: an ability to operate in silence. Unlike other emerging figures who sought influence through public displays of power, Fallahian built his reputation through closed-door decisions, quiet evaluations, and a growing network of clerical allies who trusted him to handle the regime's most sensitive problems. Those formative years became the blueprint for what he would later become: a man whose power came not from public authority, but from the unseen machinery that controlled information, monitored dissidents, and shaped Iran's internal security strategy. And as Iran's enemies multiplied and its political landscape became more volatile, it was inevitable that someone with Fallahian's mindset would find himself pulled deeper into the heart of the nation's intelligence operations, setting the stage for a rise that would eventually draw the attention of the entire world. As the newly formed Islamic Republic struggled to consolidate control, the demand for a disciplined intelligence structure grew rapidly, and Ali Fallahian emerged as one of the figures uniquely positioned to shape it. His ascent truly began when he moved into the orbit of President Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, one of the most powerful political architects of post-revolution Iran. Rafsanjani needed someone who could transform Iran's fragmented security arms into a unified force capable of neutralizing threats both inside and beyond the country's borders. Fallahian, With his clerical legitimacy, unwavering loyalty, and reputation for quiet efficiency, was the perfect choice. By the time he entered senior leadership within MOS, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, Iran was facing a complex array of enemies. Kurdish factions seeking autonomy, exiled opposition groups spreading propaganda abroad, and Western agencies probing for weaknesses in the young regime. Fallahian capitalized on this environment, designing strategies that blended religion, intelligence, and geopolitics in ways few before him had attempted. Under his influence, MOS expanded its global reach, establishing networks in Europe, Turkey, and South America, tracking dissidents and monitoring Iranian communities abroad. Inside Iran, he built a reputation as a man who understood how to manage internal unrest without drawing unnecessary attention. His decisions were calculated, his movements discreet, and his loyalty unmistakable. What set him apart was not just his operational skills, but his ability to build alliances across Iran's power structure. Clerics, military leaders, political strategists, and regional commanders. They saw in him a man who could handle the darker tasks of statecraft while maintaining an image of religious respectability. As his authority grew, so did the scope of MOS operations attributed to his leadership. Dissident groups found their activities increasingly restricted, foreign agencies realized they were being watched, and Iranian operatives were sent abroad with missions that rarely became public. Fallahian's rise was not meteoric but methodical, shaped by patience and the understanding that true power inside Iran was held by those who operated behind the curtain. By the early 1990s, he had become one of the most influential intelligence chiefs in the Middle East, a man whose decisions could ripple across continents. Yet it was precisely this expanding reach, this confidence in covert capability, that would soon push him into a confrontation with the international community, drawing attention to operations that could no longer remain hidden and setting the stage for the turning point that would define his global notoriety. The moment that pushed Ali Fallahian from a powerful but largely invisible intelligence chief into the center of global controversy came in 1992. Inside a modest restaurant in Berlin known as the Mykonos. On a quiet September night, gunmen stormed the location and executed 4 leaders of the Iranian Kurdish opposition. At first, the attack looked like another politically motivated killing in a decades-long regional conflict. But as German investigators dug deeper, a different picture emerged, one that pointed far beyond the gunmen themselves. What they uncovered transformed the incident into an international earthquake. The German court concluded that the order for the operation originated not from rogue actors, but from the highest levels of the Iranian state. And among the names placed at the center of the command structure was Ali Fallahian, then serving as Iran's Minister of Intelligence. For the first time, a Western court openly accused a sitting Iranian intelligence minister of orchestrating an assassination on European soil. In 1996, Germany issued an international arrest warrant, marking Fallahian as a wanted man and making him one of the first Iranian officials ever pursued through global legal channels. The consequences extended beyond Europe. In Argentina, investigators examining the 1994 AMIA bombing, one of the deadliest attacks in the country's history, identified Fallahian among several Iranian officials suspected of involvement in planning the operation. This led to an Interpol Red Notice, further solidifying his status as an international fugitive in the eyes of Western authorities. Rumors began to circulate within diplomatic circles that Fallahian had overseen a network tasked with eliminating Iranian dissidents abroad, a covert program allegedly active in Europe, Turkey, and South America. Iran denied the allegations, calling them politically motivated. but intelligence agencies across the West continued to view Fallahian as a central figure in operations designed to silence the regime's opponents. The Mykonos ruling became a historical turning point not only for Iran's foreign relations, but for Fallahian personally. His name, once confined to internal security reports, now appeared in international media, government dossiers, and counterterrorism briefings. This was the moment where the secretive cleric stepped, unwillingly, into global visibility. And while the Iranian state shielded him from extradition, the world's perception of him changed permanently. The turning point had reshaped his legacy, casting him not just as a domestic power broker but as a man whose decisions, allegedly carried out from behind closed doors, had triggered diplomatic crises across continents. From here, the focus began to shift toward the machinery he oversaw, the empire of influence he cultivated, and how he managed to maintain authority despite the storm gathering around him. Unlike cartel bosses who flaunted cash, weapons, or fast cars, Ali Fallahian built an empire rooted not in spectacle but in silence. His power did not depend on public intimidation. It depended on information, who controlled it, who accessed it, and who disappeared when they knew too much. As the head of MOS, Fallahian exercised authority through a labyrinth of intelligence officers, informants, and overseas operatives woven into Iranian communities across Europe, the Middle East, and South America. Rather than a lavish mansion or celebrity lifestyle, his world revolved around private briefings, sealed reports, and layers of deniability. Yet this understated lifestyle masked an influence far larger than his public presence suggested. Inside Iran, Fallahian oversaw a system capable of monitoring political figures, journalists, clerics, and dissidents with astonishing reach. Surveillance networks, internal interrogation centers, and state-controlled media often mirrored the priorities he set. Those who met him behind closed doors frequently described him as calm, composed, and unwavering. A man who understood that real control relied on shaping perception as much as enforcing law. Outside Iran, his alleged operations carried a different tone. Western intelligence agencies believed he supervised covert teams that tracked Iranian opposition leaders abroad, blending diplomatic channels with clandestine networks. In places like Germany, Turkey, and Argentina, his shadow appeared in investigations into assassinations, disappearances, and bombing plots. While Iran rejected these accusations, the consistent appearance of Fallahian's name in foreign intelligence reports reinforced a narrative of a man whose empire extended beyond national borders. His influence also stretched into economic and political spheres. As MOS expanded under his tenure, it reportedly developed financial arms, front companies, and partnerships that allowed it to operate without relying on traditional government budgets. These financial structures, which allegedly included overseas investments and commercial entities, gave Fallahian the tools to conduct long-term operations that left minimal paper trails. Yet perhaps the most striking element of his empire was how little the public knew about him. Unlike military commanders or politicians who appeared regularly on television, Fallahian cultivated a presence defined by absence. There were no flamboyant speeches, no public spectacles, only brief televised appearances that revealed nothing of the machinery he commanded. This invisibility became part of his strength. To supporters, he was a guardian of national security. To his critics, he was the architect of a parallel state operating beyond oversight. But even as controversy grew, Fallahian managed to maintain relationships within Iran's clerical and political elite. His ability to navigate shifting alliances allowed him to survive transitions of power that ended the careers of many others. And while his international reputation darkened with every new allegation, inside Iran he remained a figure whose knowledge of state secrets granted him lasting protection. Yet the walls around his empire could not remain impenetrable forever, and soon the world's scrutiny would force him into an entirely new phase. One where the question was no longer how much power he held, but how long he could avoid the consequences waiting beyond Iran's borders. By the late 1990s, the name Ali Fallahian had become a diplomatic fault line, a figure who embodied the sharp divide between how Iran viewed its security priorities and how the rest of the world interpreted its covert actions. Though he never faced arrest, his world began to shrink dramatically once Germany issued its international warrant, and Interpol followed with a red notice tied to the AMIA bombing in Argentina. For most high-ranking officials, such global pressure would have spelled political death. But Iran's internal structure, built on layered power centers and deep loyalty networks, ensured that Fallahian never fell completely out of reach. He faded from the spotlight, but not from influence. Inside Iran, he continued to hold advisory roles, appeared periodically in state media, and occasionally resurfaced during elections. His survival was a testament to how deeply woven he was into the fabric of the intelligence establishment. Yet he could no longer travel freely. The warrants meant any step outside Iran risked detention, interrogation, or extradition. Intelligence analysts often remarked that Fallahian became a prisoner of the state he helped build, safe only as long as he stayed within the borders he once defended so aggressively. Western governments continued to cite him in counter-terrorism briefings, not because he posed an active operational threat, but because he symbolized a chapter of Iranian intelligence history that still shaped geopolitical tensions. The allegations tied to Mykonos and AMIA never disappeared. Instead, they became reference points every time Iran's global activities were scrutinized. In interviews years later, Fallahian dismissed the accusations, framing them as political fabrications designed to weaken Iran. But the international community never reversed its stance. The red notices remained active, the warrants never withdrawn, and his name persisted in academic studies, intelligence dossiers, and foreign policy debates. Even as newer figures emerged within Iran's intelligence hierarchy, none carried a legacy as controversial or as far-reaching as his. Today, Fallahian exists in a liminal space, not fallen, not exiled, yet permanently constrained. He remains a man shielded by the state, but pursued by a world unwilling to forget the past. For many observers, his story raises a difficult question. How does someone so deeply implicated in unresolved global controversies continue to move within political circles without consequence? And for others, the greater mystery is what he still knows. Secrets spanning decades, operations never publicly acknowledged, and decisions that altered the political landscape across continents. His downfall, if it ever arrives, may not come from courts or warrants, but from the shifting tides of Iran's internal politics. Until then, Ali Fallahian stands as one of the most enduring examples of how power, secrecy, and state protection can blur the meaning of justice, leaving the world to wonder whether accountability will ever catch up to him.